Welcome back to Her Rules Radio. I'm your hostess, Alexandra Jameson. We are almost 5 years old here at Her Rules Radio. Can you believe it? In October, we'll be celebrating all month long. Yep, it's 2019. I'm 5 years old. So on this podcast, I interview experts and authors and myself sometimes about different ways that women and people who identify as women and non-men, how we can live life by our own rules, feeling free and really in ourselves. And one of the jokes that my clients have with me and my friends and my husband is, Alex, you always say, so I read this book that ... Yes, I read a lot. One of the things I love about having a podcast is that it gives me an excuse to read a ton of books, reach out to publishers, interview authors. My favorite Auntie Bo was a middle school librarian for 20 to 30 years. I can't remember. Our family, huge book nerds, huge library and Powell's bookstore lovers. So it's just been my life. I would always beg to go to the library on boring summer days, and I would just go and my mom would drop me off for hours. So I still read a lot, and I read a lot of books this summer. I read over 25 books this summer, and now that it's going to be the first week of fall, I thought I would catch you up on all the books I read, because I covered a lot of territory. A lot of nonfiction, some stuff about creativity and business, passion, purpose, really like some self-helpy nonfiction stuff, but also some really fluffy fiction I can't wait to tell you about. So I'm going to talk about the 25 books that I read this summer. And first I want to talk about how I get these books. How do I source my reading? First of all, there's a bajillion books that I want to read. I keep lists. Every time a friend recommends a book, I write it down. If there's a topic that I suddenly get curious about, I'll go and onto Goodreads, I'll go onto Amazon and just start looking at books. What's out there? What do people like? But how do I actually get the books? Well, I have a lot of different ways I source them. The top two are two library apps that I use on my phone. One is called Libby, the other is called Overdrive. Now all you have to do is get a library card from your local library, and then you can connect Libby and Overdrive to your library card, and you can download ebooks and audiobooks to your phone or your Kindle or your computer for free. And you check them out. You get them for like 3 weeks, however long your library checks ebooks and audiobooks out to you. Or if they're not available, you place a hold and they'll be delivered automatically to your device when it's your turn. It's pretty cool. And then there's also another app I use called ThriftBooks, which is on my phone. And you can go on there and people are selling their used books, which is so fun to go find the book you really want and actually get a hard copy of it. Because there's some books that I like to read on my Kindle or listen to. And then there's some books that I want to have a copy of. Now, I live in New York City, so I don't have a ton of space. But we do have a lot of books in this house already, so I'm constantly having to go through my books and get rid of stuff. So some books I like to have a hard copy of, and some I can just read it on Kindle or listen to it on audio. Now, Powells.com, this is the place for used and new books. The other great thing about Powells.com is you can sell them your physical books. You can enter in the ISBN number from your books, and they'll tell you which ones they will buy back from you. And then you just ship them to Powell's with their little prepaid shipping label, and you can get credit on their website and buy more books. It's a very virtuous cycle. I love it so much. And then, of course, there's KindleUnlimited. Now, if you're an Amazon Kindle person, you can pay a little bit to be a KindleUnlimited member, and it costs a little bit. But for my fluffy fiction, I go through it really fast. I also know that those authors do get paid by the page count, so that feels good. It's not that I'm just getting it for free. Well, it's not free because I pay for a membership, but the authors are getting paid depending on how many pages of their book that I read. I'd be lying if I said I never get tempted by a good old-fashioned bookstore, especially used bookstores. I just love going in there and wandering around. A lot of my life has been, I can think of moments throughout my life when I've discovered a book I had never heard of. I'm just randomly looking through shelves, or here in Brooklyn, one of my favorite things is people just leave boxes of books out for free. It's a free box. And I have found some of my favorite books of all time in a free box. So I do love finding an actual book. Now, for the nonfiction books that I'm going to talk about, I like to take notes. I take notes because I'm constantly referring back. I want to tag things for future reference. So I use a note-taking system. It's called Evernote, which is a phone app, or you can get it on your computer. And you can take notes and quote passages or write your own inspirational thinking from a book and put a page number. But then you can tag the quotes and passages for future reference. So I have tags like coaching, growth mindset, courage, confidence, creativity, and marketing. And I know some people use a Google Doc for this as well. And I use Google for everything else, but Evernote's tagging system is way easier for me. And also Evernote's app is easier for me to use on my phone, and I'm on the go a lot listening to things, so I prefer that. So let's dive into the 25 books I read this summer. So the first is a great fiction read called Children of Blood and Bone. I love magical fantasy and adventure stories. This is Tommy Ayademi's West African-inspired fantasy debut. It was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller, and it's this incredible world of magic and danger, and was one of the biggest young adult fiction books of 2018, and it's going to be made into a 3-part film series. So Children of Blood and Bone, I really enjoyed it. If you are a magical fantasy adventure person, pick this one up. Now, these are not listed in any order, by the way. I did not organize these by topic or even timeline of when I read them, because I'm often reading 2 or 3 books at a time. The next book is Fame by Justine Bateman. Yes, Justine Bateman from Family Ties. Remember her? She played Mallory, Michael J. Fox's sister. I was actually listening to her talk on a podcast and decided to get her book based on the interview. So Justine Bateman was famous before selfies, before, bags of fan mail gave way to Twitter shitstorms, and she took notes along the way. It's like reading her diary, but it's really her examination of her own celebrity and taking it apart and piecing it back together and reflecting on her true self and what fame is and how it changes people and relationships. And it's really written in this interesting tone where you're almost listening to her think. So it's not the normal writerly book. It's pretty fascinating, and it's frightening at times and revelatory. And when you think about how fame obsessed we are, I just highly recommend it. It's a really interesting framework to look at our current political system and our current celebrity culture that we're living in. So Fame by Justine Bateman, really interesting. Then I picked up on Kindle Unlimited, How to Publish a Book on Amazon by Sam Kearns. So this book is exactly what it says it is. It's an up-to-date, step-by-step guide on self-publishing. Everything from how to schedule your writing time, editing, and design to how to upload to Amazon, create the cover, and how to promote and sell the book. I am in the midst of this one right now still because I'm writing another ebook that I will, be announcing here soon. Spoiler alert, it's all about how to prepare for and recover from knee surgery. So Sam Kearns' book, How to Publish a Book on Amazon, has been really helpful. Then I read New Power. In New Power, Jeremy Hamins and Henry Timms talk about spreading ideas, building movements, and this chaotic, connected age we're in. So Why do some movements or brands have such huge success now, and why do some fail? It's about the rise of mega platforms like Facebook and Uber, unexpected out of nowhere political victories, these emergence of movements like Me Too, and what's really behind them is the rise of what the authors call new power. So for most of human history, the rules of power were very clear. Power was something that was seized, often by force, and then guarded. That's the old power, and it was really out of reach for most humans. But this hyper-connected world we're now living in makes a new kind of power possible. And new power is made by many. It's open, participatory, and peer-driven. It's most forceful when it surges, and there's this really interesting battle right now between old and new power that's determining who governs us, how we work, and even how we think and feel. So it shines a light on a lot of the cultural movements and phenomena, including Black Lives Matter, the Ice Bucket Challenge, Airbnb, Lego, NASA, Reddit, TED. It's really, really interesting. So if you're in business or you're a homegrown sociologist, I think you'd find new power pretty interesting. Number 5, I just finished a couple days ago, called Drive by Dan Pink. Now, this book is a little old. It's so funny. I told my husband yesterday, I'm like, oh my God, I just finished reading this book, Drive by Dan Pink. And he looked at me, he's like, Alex, I've been talking about this book for years. I'm like, oh, whoops. So the gist of this book, I found it so interesting, is that it's the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Most people think the best way to motivate is with rewards like money, the carrot and stick approach. But in this really persuasive book, he argues that the secret to high performance and satisfaction at work and at school and at home is this deep human need to direct our own lives, to learn and to create new things, and to do better by ourselves and the world. This intrinsic motivation. Fascinating. I can't recommend this book enough. Especially if you are an entrepreneur or in sales or are a manager or a parent. There's a lot of different reasons why you'd get something out of this book. Now we're switching back to fluff. My fluffy read, my fluffy fiction, was a Dan Brown book, Origin. And this highlights the same Harvard professor, Robert Langdon, who was in the Da Vinci Code. So it's impossible for me to read one of these books without seeing Tom Hanks running through the story, because he played Robert Langdon in the Da Vinci Code. So this story opens at the ultra-modern Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And like all Dan Brown stories, it's just one long chase scene. But I feel like I'm learning something when I read these books. And I feel like I'm getting art history lessons, even though I'm not sure if the facts in the story are remotely true or if they're just made up for effect or if they're, manipulated in some way. But I'm honestly too lazy to find out. And I really just like these stories because they are super page turners and they're really fun. They're great vacation reads. Then there's a book that I actually am rereading called Becoming Magic by Genevieve Davis. It's actually 3 books in one. So I should give myself credit for 2 extra books here, but whatever. So if you're jaded by New Age spirituality and the whole law of attraction idea, or you become bored with it, these books are for you. The 3 books are called Becoming Magic, Doing Magic, and Advanced Magic. And it kind of lays the groundwork for becoming magical, reawakening this power to create and to manifest and attract. And it is about moving forward slowly, moving on to more complex techniques only after the basics are mastered. And I read it for the first time a couple years ago, recommended to me by a coach. I really enjoyed it, and I decided to revisit it, and I'm really enjoying it. Be warned, if you want a quick fix of positive thinking and to be told that the magic of the law of attraction is fast and simple, don't buy this book. This is more, I think, serious and about mastering something. So there you go. The 3 books called Becoming Magic by Genevieve Davis. Then The Art of Learning. This is another one I discovered, I think, through another podcast. And this book, The Art of Learning, is by Josh Waitzkin. Fascinating. It's his memoir. And it's also kind of his life's work. So Josh really knows what it means to be at the top of his game, to be the best in the world at something twice. He has been a public figure since he was a kid. He's the kid that was the subject of the book and the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. So he became a national chess champion at the age of 9. He grew up here in New York City, stumbled into playing chess by wandering around Washington Square Park, where my kids sometimes skateboards. And after dominating the chess world for 10 years, he switched over to martial arts and ultimately earned the title of a specific kind of martial arts. And he started really examining what he's good at, and it's the art of learning. So with really a fun narrative to read or listen to, it's this heart-stopping martial arts wars and then tense chess face-offs with these life lessons and, clearly explaining principles of excellence, principles to learning, and how to use failure to your advantage. Achievement, talking about achievement, and even at the championship level, how achievement is a function of a lifestyle that fuels a creative, resilient growth process and mindset. So even though it's not all about positive psychology, I felt a lot of positive psychology threads throughout this book. So it's a fascinating story about how we learn and how we can be better at learning and mastering things. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. Number 9, which I am still reading, my husband and I are kind of working our way through it slowly together, is How to Become Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. Now, anti-racism is a really transformative concept that reorients and re-energizes the conversation about racism. And being anti-racist is a term that I've also heard from an author and teacher, Catrice Jackson, who I've taken workshops with. She's written a bunch of books that I highly, highly recommend, especially for white women. She works with white women a lot. But in How to Become Anti-Racist, at its core, it really discusses how racism is a powerful system that creates false hierarchies of human value. And the warped logic extends beyond race, from the way we regard people of different ethnicities or skin colors to the way we treat people of different sexes or gender identities, body types, how racism intersects with class and culture and geography. It really takes you through ethics and history and law and science, and with the author's own personal history of awakening to anti-racism. So if you're up for it, I highly recommend it. This should be every white person's work to read with and engage in these conversations. Number 10, back to the fluffy fiction. I read Void by Cora Lee June and Raven Kennedy. Okay, I have a secret to confess, everyone. I have a specific flavor of erotica that I love. I did not know it existed or that it had a name until about 4 or 5 months ago. It's called a supernatural reverse harem. Okay, it's where a young woman has supernatural powers and is usually the most super powerful supernatural ever. Often she's living in the human world and she thinks she's human. She just has crazy things happen to her whole life. Turns out when she turns 18 or 21, she gets clued in that she's actually a supernatural being and she's been hidden from the supernatural world, and she gets drawn back into it. She gets involved in this ongoing war or struggle with other supernaturals and ends up with a harem of supernatural male lovers. Usually a vampire, a werewolf, a shapeshifter, and a necromancer, someone who can bring back the dead or communicate with the dead. Laughing at myself. It's pretty formulaic, but I love them. They're so fun. Again, it's called a supernatural reverse harem. Go look it up. There's tens of thousands of these books. And this one, Void, was one of my favorites so far. It's full of different kinds of supernaturals, and the erotica is pretty good too, I have to admit. Don't worry, I have more on this list later. But we're going to switch over to Do the Work, Stephen Pressfield. Actually, I have two Stephen Pressfield books back to back. Do the Work is all about how we get in the way of producing our great work. Have you ever started a project but never finished? Would you like to do work that matters but don't know where to start? Or do you get stuck? So in Do the Work, Stephen Pressfield, it's kind of a manifesto. He's a best-selling author now. He also wrote The War of Art and Turning Pro, which is on my list next. And it really takes the reader from the start to the finish of any project, novel, screenplay, album, software, program you're building, coaching, whatever. It really highlights the predictable resistance points along the way and walks you through each one of them. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are not the first person to hit the wall. So Do the Work is great. I always have it. I've had it in my Kindle for years. I also have the next book, Turning Pro, which, these are real mindset for creative entrepreneurs kinds of books. I keep them near at hand for when I inevitably get stuck or run into my own resistance. It happens. And Turning Pro is all about the mindset. All you have to do is change your mind. Turning Pro, becoming a professional, it's free, but it's not easy. We give up on ourselves. It's free, but it demands sacrifice. When we turn pro, when we decide, what we get is that we find our power. We find our will and our voice. We find our self-respect. We become who we always were, but had until that moment been afraid to embrace and live out. So those two Stephen Pressfield books, super fantastic. I highly recommend for any creative leaders out there. Next, fluffy fiction. City of Girls. Remember, I said I'm not going in any particular order. There's no rhyme or reason for this list. This is by Elizabeth Gilbert. So her new book, City of Girls, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love and The Signature of All Things, which I loved both of those books. It's a super fun, delicious novel of glamour and sex and adventure about a young woman discovering that you don't have to be a good girl to be a good person. It happens here in New York City before and during World War II, which I really loved because she actually talks about the neighborhood that I'm living in currently. So it was really fun. It's like about fashion and love and sex and gender dynamics and World War II. And it was a blast. I think I read it in like 3 days. The next one, it's another one of my favorite supernatural fantasies. It's called Shadow Spell Academy by Jamin Eve, a young adult book. Why is this listed as a children's book on Amazon? It should probably be reserved for precocious middle schoolers and up, like I was when I was 12 or 13 when I read V.C. Andrews' Flower in the Attic. By the way, why was Flowers in the Attic in the middle school library? I don't know. But I was already eating my way through 10-cent used paperback Harlequin romance novels at that age, so V.C. Andrews was the next logical step. Anyway, Shadow Spell Academy. It was fun. Another super sexy fantasy adventure story. It wasn't as good as Void, but, they can't all be super fantastic. Number 15, My Familiar Stranger. Yes, another supernatural fantasy. Okay, let's just call it what it is. Erotica. My Familiar Stranger by Victoria Dannon. This young woman, she's a princess in one dimension. She's like a princess warrior in another dimension, and she ends up on Earth, but a different version of her planet, Earth. And she lands in an ancient society of vampire hunters and they heal her because she got all banged up, coming through the dimensions, and now they're, she's like in love with a sexy elf and a really attractive 600-year-old vampire and like some other weird supernatural lover. Again, totally fun and slightly embarrassing to admit. Book 16. So I'm actually going to have this book as an interview here on the show soon. Mary Magdalene Revealed, The First Apostle, Her Feminist Gospel, and the Christianity We Haven't Tried Yet by Megan Watterson. So, Megan Watterson, who has been on the show before, she says, not sure if that's true. She wrote a book called Reveal, which was also really beautiful. Megan is a Harvard-trained theologian, and her book, Mary Magdalene Revealed, talks about the gospel of Mary Magdalene and how it's a very different love story from the one that we have come to refer to as Christianity. So it's based on a gospel, as ancient and authentic as any of the gospels that the Christian Bible contains now, that was buried deep in the Egyptian desert after the 4th century, when all copies were supposed to have been destroyed purposefully. But some rebel monks were wise enough to refuse to destroy it and saved a few copies of this manuscript, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And Megan really digs into it. Again, she's a Harvard-trained theologian. She's a feminist spiritual teacher. And she really goes into a more historically and theologically accurate depiction of who Mary was within the early Christian church. And she shares her love of this aspect of Christianity. It's really touching. I wasn't raised personally with any religion. I did go to church by myself at the Lutheran church down the road because I found that they had cookies and Kool-Aid. So I went to Sunday school by myself when I was a kid for treats. But I've always been fascinated by Christianity and the history and the story and, who decided that this is the story we tell. Anyway, this book is fascinating. So if you were raised Christian or Catholic and have had a hard time staying in the religion, the organized religion part of it, I highly recommend this book by Megan Watterson. We will have her on the show soon. The next book, number 17, is called Start Finishing by Charlie Gilkey. Out, I believe, this week or next week in September of 2019. You can start finishing the work that you care about the most. So Charlie is ex-military. He's the perfect guy to help you focus on finishing rather than being buried in busy work and distraction and fatigue. The real joy-producing, difference-making ideas that you have that have been waiting within you until the time is right. Let's be honest. You're waiting for someday, but someday is never going to come on its own. Charlie, in this book, Start Finishing, lays out his 9-step method, which he uses. He is, like myself, a high-level executive and business coach, and he teaches keys to self-mastery, building your success pack, your menu of guides and peers and supporters, how to keep working through the challenges and the frustrations and the thrashing that comes with any project that matters to you. He talks about success in a new way. I've started reading it. I'm probably halfway through it now, and it's helped me in seeing some log jams and some tar pits and ways that my projects can get stuck. I've written 5 books. I've hosted and produced a podcast for 5 years. I've helped other people produce their podcasts and books. I've been coaching for 19 years. Even I struggle with the same mindset stuff. So you're not alone in this. People like me absolutely have to keep working on these things. The next book is called The Element by Ken Robinson, who had a great TED Talk about this topic, about how education is killing the creativity in our children. This book, The Element, was a breakthrough bestseller about talent and passion and achievement. And the element that he's speaking of, that he's writing about, is the point at which natural talent meets personal passion. When people arrive at their element, they feel most themselves and inspired and achieve at their highest levels. He's got a great sense of humor, tons of great stories about Paul McCartney and Matt Groening and Richard Branson and Ariana Huffington, and just all these, he shows that age and occupation are not a barrier, and that this is the essential strategy, discovering your element, for transforming education and business and communities. Really, I was really inspired by this book. Book 19 actually just had on the podcast Love You Like the Sky, the memoir by Sarah Neustadt. She wrote this memoir of being a suicide survivor while getting her PhD, and how she recovered and got through losing her beloved. And it's a really raw, powerful book. It's had a huge impact on me personally. I'm still kind of unpacking it, but I think it's essential reading for anyone who has lost a loved one to suicide. And you can go back and listen to that episode. I believe I called it Suicide of a Beloved. It's just a week ago. The next book is it was originally a magazine, the New York Times Magazine, the 1619 Project. Now I'm still listening to it. I'm actually listening to it as a podcast. The New York Times decided to release the 1619 Project as a podcast, and listening is reading. So this is a major initiative, an incredible piece of work about the history of this country, the United States of America, by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the center of our national narrative. It takes its name from the moment in August 1619 when that first slave ship appeared off Point Comfort, Virginia, carrying 20 enslaved people from Africa. And these people were sold to the colonists, and that began the system of chattel slavery that would last for 250 years. And the repercussions do not be fooled. They're absolutely a part of the fabric of America still. It's incredible. This project goes through, the foundation of our economy, how that can be traced back to slavery, the foundation of music and culture in this country, how that is all tied to Black African Americans and slavery, how the history of how these things weave together. It's fascinating, really important. Switching tracks again, back to my fluffy fiction, the Druid series. I just started it. It's a series, I think it's like 7 books long. I'm in book 1. It's really fun. I read it before bed. It's about a 2,000-year-old druid who looks like a 21-year-old hot young Irishman. This holds a particular place in my heart. Did I mention I'm studying druidry? More on that later. But anyway, Atticus O'Sullivan, 2,000-year-old druid who's constantly facing magical foes. It's really fun. He has a dog, an Irish wolfhound, who talks back to him. I really enjoy it. These are the silly things I enjoy reading for fun, people. Book 22, Improv Wisdom. Now, probably a dozen people have mentioned this book to me over the years. It's called Improv Wisdom, Don't Prepare, Just Show Up, by Patricia Ryan Madsen. And she was a Stanford University professor and master in the art of improvisation. And she explains how to adopt the attitudes and techniques used by musicians and actors and improv comics, and how these tools and techniques are being taught to entrepreneurs, engineers, first responders, housewives, Alzheimer's caregivers. I mean, it's a really it's a fun, interesting, tool-filled book. And if you're looking for a way to really be engaged and in your life, this book's for you. Book 23, Damn Good Advice for People with Talent: How to Unleash Your Creative Potential by America's Master Communicator, George Lois. So George Lois was one of the original madmen, the original advertising men of Madison Avenue here in New York City. And he compiled, he's like a sage, an elder of the communicators. He compiles all these lessons and practical advice and anecdotes for inspiration. It's a great, I think, creative Bible for those looking to succeed in business and life creatively. So, yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's definitely from the male point of view, but I like him, and I would like to have lunch with him. So, if you know George Lois, let me know. The next book, number 24, Art Matters by Neil Gaiman and Chris Riddell. This book, I love Neil Gaiman. First of all, I've read probably most of his books, including the Sandman comic book series, which I've read like 6 times. It's a beautiful, creative call to arms of these 4 gorgeous pieces written by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by Chris Riddell, and they've worked together on lots of projects. Gaiman has given all these incredible speeches and written poems and creative manifesto, and this book is an embodiment of his vision, an exploration of how reading and imagining and creating can transform the world, and how important it is, especially now, that creatives and artists use their voice. He talks about credo, manifesto on free expression, make good art, his commencement address that he gave at the Philadelphia University of the Arts, a poem called Making a Chair that's about the joys of creating something, and On Libraries, which is his, passionate argument for libraries and how important they are. And, as I already shared with you, libraries have been a huge part of my life. So if you are looking for something to inspire you and to keep making art in the face of adversity, get this book, Art Matters. And finally, the book that is probably going to take me the longest to read. I've been reading it for the last several weeks, and I think this one's going to take years of my life because it's massive, but it's super rich and important. It's called Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler. This book, which is, I don't know how many printings it's had, but it's at least, 35 years old. It explores what they called at the time the neo-pagan movement in the United States through discussions of various groups, witchcraft, Wicca, Druids, etc., and really traces back these neo-pagan subcultures, their history. Margot Adler, she attended all these ritual gatherings and interviewed diverse, colorful gallery of people across the U.S., people who find inspiration in nature and myth and ancient deities, gods and goddesses, even science fiction. And, she's taking an honest, historical look at religious experiences and beliefs, spirituality and practices and lifestyles of America's pagan groups, whether it's witches or Wiccans. She covers a lot of territory, and it's a fascinating book. It's really well researched. I don't think it's been added to or edited in the last 20 years. So it does feel a little dated, but it's still an incredible resource. It feels really foundational. I'm personally diving into my Celtic and Druidic roots myself. It feels like the most true and honest path for me to explore spirituality because I am such a nature lover and a book lover. And I want to explore these paths as, how did the people that I came from explore this? How did they worship? How did they interact with nature? So Drawing Down the Moon, it's a new favorite. So that's my 25 books that I read this summer. It was so fun. Had a lot of fun learning and reading. I hope that you find a new book that you're going to love from this massive list. I know it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? But I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. So if you loved this show, go on over to iTunes, leave a review, share the show with your friends. Tell me what you love about the show. I think in October, since it's our 5th anniversary, we're going to do another giveaway. So for new reviews, I'm going to be choosing a winner of a gift bag of goodies. I'll be putting that together in the next couple of weeks. Totally ethically bribing you all for good reviews. Yes, not ashamed to admit it. It's true. It happens. But 5 years, I say let's do a giveaway. Let's do a contest. And you can hit me up over on Instagram at DeliciousAlex. That's where I spend the most time. Thank you for being here. I hope you found a new book that you will love. Let me know what you think about it. And we'll be back here next week with another Her Rules Radio. Mwah!